You see, we talked about it just before we started, and Martin has done exactly the same thing.
I'm
Dude.
I had my thing,
You're meant to be.
I don't know who mutes me. Maybe Elijah mutes me the moment the thing goes off, because I actually unmuted myself. Anyway,
He doesn't like the sound of your voice.
And welcome to episode 24 of our Great Leadership Show. And thank you for making time to spend an hour with our guest and I this evening. One of the factors that makes old age homes attractive to elders is companionship. They're in constant company of people their own age. If their children are away from home, they have to live alone, and that can cause stress and depression. Living in an old age home may give rise to feelings of abandonment as well. So loneliness is also an issue. Ideally, there should be a companion at home who can fill this void. Companionship is paramount, especially for those who have lost their spouses. To talk about companionship and living with grandparents, today in studio we have our guests. Let me start with Dr. Tasneem Yamani. We've got Joy Kabiru, and I've seen Shruti Shah has disappeared. I think she's lost connection, but she'll be joining us anytime now. Waweru, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, sir. How are you doing?
Good. The weeks fly so fast.
Yeah, it does, and it's an interesting show today. It's not something that people just pick up and say in conversation. By the way, do you know I want to whatever? So I'm looking forward to this show this evening. One other thing I need to point out: the last two shows, I think we've had women only. I'm feeling a bit, we need to get some. We need to find some men to put on the show.
We need some base, is what you're saying.
Yes, we need some base. That's what I put it. Yeah, I hadn't to any of our guests right now. It's just something I've noticed.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But the topics have been equally very interesting. I mean, last week we spoke about clutter and what was it, hoarding and clutter, and I learned a thing or two. Especially, I thought it was all related to habits we pick up from our parents and stuff, but there was more associated to it. So that was really interesting. But yeah, let's not take from today's topic. Today's topic is very interesting, and I'm so looking forward to this. So, Waweru, over to you.
Thank you so much, Martin. As always, we'd like to say a very big thank you to our guests for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us on Great Leadership Live. As standard operating procedure, I'm going to ask the guests to each introduce themselves very briefly and tell us a bit of a background about them. So I'm going to start with Joy, please. Go ahead. Let us know who you are.
Yeah. So my name is Joy Kabiru. I'm a mother of two children, 6 and 9. And I work as an ophthalmologist with a subspecialty in oculoplastics and neck-cell surgery. Yeah, I work in Nairobi. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Daktari, please let us know who you are.
Okay, my name is Dr. Tasneem Yamani. I'm a general physician with a special interest and certification in geriatrics, which is caring for the older person. I do home-based care, and I am based at Apples and Sense in Muthaiga, where we see patients as well. My field involves a lot of old people, and that's, I think, what we're talking about today. So I'm really glad to have this conversation with you.
Thanks for joining us, Daktari. Last but not least, Shruti.
Good evening, everyone. Have I unmuted myself?
Yes.
Yes, you have.
Okay, my name is Shruti. I'm a mother to two lovely children and a crazy dog. I'm the co-founder of Arama, which is a recreational and residential senior care center. In my past life, I worked at the factory in the pension space, so close to elderly people. So that's where I'm still at. And look forward to this evening.
Thank you so much, Shruti. I'm going to ask all three of our guests right now at the moment, just either by show of hands or just vocalize. How many of you are actually living with a grandparent at the moment? Or moved in grandmama or grandpapa, whatever the case may be. So Joy, Daktari, no?
No, I live with my parents. I mean, they're part of my everyday, but they're not grandparents. They're grandparents to my kids.
And Shruti?
So again, no, but we live next to parents and a grandparent, but not, we don't live with them.
There's a question about that I'm going to ask this now. So Joy, I want to come back to you and ask a question. What advice would you give to those who are considering moving their grandparents in with them? And what circumstances actually made you then to make that decision?
Yeah, so by grandparents, we're talking about my parents, right?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess it's a pretty big decision to make, and there'll be a lot of changes, and so it depends on whether they're moving in with you or you're moving in with them. But for either situation, the children have to be prepared. The parents, I think, have to be prepared even more, especially depending on how old they are. Moving parents or changing the situation around them when they're older confuses them a bit. So I would suggest either regular visits to the new place where they're going to be, long visits, so that they start getting used to the environment there, because it can get very confusing when an old person moves to a new place. And if it's you moving into the home, then the children and yourself need to spend quite a lot of time visiting before you make that move. Then you have to think about the staff that you're going to need. If you're moving, if the parents are moving, I think they should come with one of the staff because they'll be familiar with that staff. And if you're moving in, try to maintain the staff that is in that home as far as possible. I mean, there's so many things to think about, but I think those are the main things, because it's the people who will be affected most, the children and the parents and yourselves. Yeah.
There's a question there's a question I do have about supports. Right now and ask this question: why do people tend to wait until the very last point before they decide that now would be a good idea to move the grandparents in or to start living with the grandparents?
So is that to me?
Daktari?
Okay, if it comes down to making that decision about which Daktari, there are two of us.
Oh, okay.
Is it for
let me say we'll only refer to Daktari as Tasneem and Joy, and we had discussed this to not confuse the two.
Yeah.
Okay, I missed that conversation. Okay, so Dr. Tasneem, find out, why do people tend to wait until the very last minute, or to wait until their grandparent or is ailing before deciding that, now would be the best time to get them into living with us or us moving in with them?
Okay, from the perspective of what I do in the workplace I come from, it's usually, when you are younger, you don't have so many problems. Taking care of you is easier. You're not so dependent on, requiring assistance.
The net today.
One of those days.
Yeah. One of those days.
If Shruti, I've got a question for Shruti then, if you are willing to take it.
Yeah.
And it probably would have tied into what Dr. Tasneem was going to say, but I wanted to find out. So we just talked to Joy through the whole show.
Well, we talk to who's there for now.
Okay, Joy. Okay, fine. Joy, let me ask this question. What are the advantages actually of living with grandmama?
Okay, so I live with my mother. I think before I lived with her, I found it quite difficult to make visits. So I think the first thing is that now you don't have to make visits to two homes. You're making visits to one home. I thought that was a great advantage. So you're not wondering, you've had a call in the morning as you're going to work, you've been told mom's not well, so you kind of have to go to work or figure out how you're going to get to that place and check on them before you go and get on the rest of the day. So the best thing about that is that in the morning you see them if you're going to work, in the evening you see them. So that's one great thing. Then the other thing is that for in terms of the kids getting to know the grandparents, that's a great time to do it. The depending on how old the parents are. For example, for me, the children are very stimulating for her when they're here, when they're with her. So they keep her on their toes, whether it's positive or negative, whether they're fighting or they're playing or they're having a good time. So that's another thing. I guess also it's helping me to see how I want things to be when I'm that age. How I'd like to start planning things now, so that when I'm at that age, it's an easy part of my journey for both my kids and myself. In terms of disadvantages, I guess it's busy. It's very busy. Sometimes there's a crunch. Like evening is a crunch time because I'm trying to get the kids, spend some time with the kids, get them to bed, and then it's time. My mom's dinner time. I need to be with her at dinner time. So that's quite hard. And then sometimes I find mom wants to be mom again. Let's go to bed. It's time to go to bed. Let's go to bed. She goes away. She comes back. Let's go to bed. Things like that. Those are a few of the disadvantages, but I think the advantages really outweigh the disadvantages. But I think it also depends on the kind of parent that one has, or how old or how young.
Some will come out later in the conversation.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a little overlap over there, Waweru. I think something happened to his internet is misbehaving.
Okay, no, I'm still here. Okay, sorry.
Right.
We'll come back. Joy, I'm going to let you expound on yeah. Before Shruti disappears. All advantages.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
We didn't get that, Waweru. Something's wrong. I think your net is really misbehaving today. You can type it and I'll ask it. Just type it and I'll ask it.
Seems that way. Okay, no problem. Done. It's already there.
Okay, just carry on. If you miss out, I'll take over. Go ahead, Owen.
Okay, so I was asking Shruti, how willing can you place grandparents in an assisted living facility?
Well, what Ray has said, I think it's a big decision. I don't think it's an easy decision for anybody, because culturally it's something that we've never had to do there. We live in a country where the elderly take care of the young, and then the young take care of the elderly. It's sort of like a cycle of life. But with the changing dynamics of the household and of the family itself, it's become more relevant. You've got families where people are spread out across the globe, whereas before everyone lived under one roof. So that's why the need has arisen. And the other thing is that people are living so much longer. We're living in a generation of in a time of 4 or 5 generations, something that didn't happen before. And every circumstance is different. Some people, they can caregiving for an elderly person is not that difficult. In fact, the grandparent is also becomes a big part of the household and is also assisting. But if someone needs a lot of assistance and there's no one there to provide that assistance or that companionship, then maybe it is relevant. So I think every situation is different. What we've found is obviously there's this taboo about elderly homes. People look at it, there's a very negative spin on them. And that's what, sometimes we're trying to put a positive spin that, you're going to be with a group of people similar to you, you're going to be engaged. And some people have that set up at home already. Like with Joy, I think it sounds like there's a lot of activity. So mom is busy, mom has people checking on her, but that's not always the case, even in Nairobi and other parts of Kenya as well. So in terms of willingness, I guess it means, Waweru, that it depends on
I don't know whether everybody can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. He's frozen. Okay. I think the next one will go to Daktari. From a practical perspective, and for what some might term as peace of mind, would it not be more prudent to move grandparents and or yourself moving within proximity of each other? I think this one is, the question is not under the same roof, but more live closer by.
Yes, the answer to that is a very simple yes, but
okay.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now, Daktari.
Okay. The answer to that question is a very simple yes, but I'd like to elaborate on it. For growing older, social interaction is very, very important. It may be family, friends, people with similar interests, because a lot of the older people have conditions that do come around, and just being around a social circle changes the dynamics of the disease. Not to get into too much technicalities, but there is something we term as the geriatric syndrome that involves things like the dementia and things like that. Now, with dementia, there is no cure, but the progress of disease can be slowed down. And having social interactions is very important in that process, or also keeping the progress of this disease stable, keeping the older person very stable, keeping them comfortable, because that's what you start looking at towards the longer years of life lived, and towards the end of life kind of thing. You want them to be comfortable. So being within a social proximity with the people you care about is very important.
Okay, let me go back to Joy. I'll take a question from one of our viewers. That's Eva Minor. How do you manage to share the needs of children versus the needs of living grandparents? You had actually mentioned splitting your time between. Maybe tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so yeah, that is quite hard. I think it's something you just have to try and organize. You just set sometimes that you'll spend with mom or dad. So I try and have dinner with her all the weekdays, because the kids have earlier dinner, and then before dinner I'll finish with the kids, get them to bed. Before coronavirus, the kids slept earlier, so it used to work. Now we're really struggling with it because they stay up later. And then if I come home early at 5, I'll try and have 4 o'clock tea with her. I'll go do an evening walk with her when she agrees. And so there's some set times which I try and keep for her. And then maybe every other or every third weekend, then I make sure I take her on an outing. But then the other times are the kids' times. The kids demand the time, and they take up the rest of the time. But it's a struggle. It's a struggle because, especially when the kids are back in school, it's quite dull for her through the day without anybody here. And trying to organize something for her to do, a visit or visitors, is a struggle, because even finding her friends, any of her friends or her age mates, they're not that many around now. So it is quite difficult getting activities for her. But the time is you have to be deliberate and set some times that you say these are for mom or that's how I think it works.
Okay, lovely. So Shruti, next question is for you. Give us an idea of costs. We're putting your grandparents in a facility. What are the considerations and financial factors one should bear in mind?
Okay, so before I do that, I just, I want to commend Joy because, Joy, you're part of something called the sandwich generation where, you've got a lower layer sandwich and an upper layer sandwich. And you've also got yourself and the stresses of day-to-day life to deal with as well. And something that I think often gets overlooked is caregiver stress, caregiver burnout and fatigue, because it is a real syndrome, especially if you're dealing with it on your own. So that just to add to Joy's point. Onto the costs, and this ties in quite nicely to what I used to do in my previous life, in that I think retirement planning is something that a lot of people haven't planned for retirement. It's assumed that someone will pick up the cost, and pensions are not really something we take very seriously. And as a rule of thumb, we used to say, whatever your last salary is, you'll need 2/3 of that per month to live a comfortable life, to live a life that you're used to. And people, they've often saved up enough for the first 5 years, 10 years of their retirement, but generally not much longer than that. I think the other thing that often gets overlooked is medical. There's some statistics that show that you spend more money in the latter part, way more money in the latter part of your life on medical bills than you do in the initial part. So it's really hard to give a number because people have different needs, even within the facility, it depends on what your needs are. And in addition to that, you've got to think about what health requirements are, how much medication you're taking, etc.
So Wawero is back.
Okay. I hope I'm here for good, at least for within the time we have to do the show. Let's see what happens. Okay, Daktari, I want to ask this question. It's an interesting phenomenon that I didn't stop to think about until we're actually looking at how to do the show. And I ask the question, what usually are the reasons that grandparents become parents the second time?
Unmute your mic.
Unmute.
Mic, please.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. There are a couple of reasons for that to happen. There are two ways of looking at it. One is as shared responsibility, because the dynamics of our work-life balances are changing. There are a lot of women working now compared to, previously. So with the need of a, helping hand around, the grandparents usually become second parent around, which has two ways of looking at it. It is actually a very positive thing because it keeps the older person active. It gives them opportunity. And if you look at what we consider healthy aging, we're looking at creating opportunities for the older person. We're looking at how much wealth of wisdom the older person has to share downwards. And, you're taking advantage of having an older person in the prime, in the best of their, ability, giving you the information, the experiences they have. And those are the kind of things we want to change around aging. Because if you look at aged population, there's always a negative stigma attached to growing old. It's always looked at more as a negative aspect of life, yet if your healthy aging is in place and you're in good health, you have a lot to give by, you have supportive environments, there is so much to contribute. So I feel that the responsibility sharing as well as the opportunity creation is why grandparents would become second-time parents again.
Shruti, you wanted to add something to that?
Mute, please. Mute.
Mute.
Okay, it's called excitement.
Sorry, the lip syncing. I just to add to what Tasneem has said. I think it's amazing. I'm watching my daughter grow up with her grandparents, and there's so much that they pass down. And they seem to have more time and patience. Like my dad is genuinely less strict with her than he ever was with us. So I think it's a great opportunity for the grandchild and the grandparent as well.
Okay, so thanks so much, Shruti. I think it's Joy. You might have touched on this before, but I was not sure that You had said at the beginning that the advantages of living with mum far outweigh the disadvantages. But I wanted to know that when do you get me time? When do you get to say, connecting, I'm going to go do a spa day, or I am going to drive to Limuru, or I am just when it becomes, does it at a point get overwhelming to the point where you say, listen, I just need to disconnect a bit. I need to have my downtime. I have to have me time. And how do you actually create that space?
Yeah. So I'm lucky. I have siblings. I have siblings who are very supportive. So they, for example, will take the kids for a weekend, and then it's just me and mom, or mom won't take my whole time. I'll then be able to do something. I do a date with my friends. So yeah, and then you find bits and pieces of me time, bedtime. People sleep early. By 9, people are asleep. So after that, that's me time. Yeah. So and after work, if I decide to come a bit late, I'll sit at the office, have a cup of tea, wind down a little bit before I driving home in the car with my music. So yeah, but my siblings are very supportive. Sometimes they'll come. I mean, they'll take mama also out sometimes. Come over and stay with her while I go out, or I drop her at their places while I go out with the kids. So that's how it works. So I get a lot of support from my siblings.
Okay, thanks so much, Joy. Dr. Tasneem, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, when it comes to what you're terming as, when you need your me time, that's, as Shruti had alluded to earlier, it's about caregiver burden. Now, when you have that, you have to remember there is a creation of balance, and it's not, it's a stereotype where, again, we feel it's very difficult to communicate with our grandparents or the older person we're living with. It's actually, it's as simple as, trying to, just tell them how you feel. Treat them with the ability to understand, because they are quite understanding. I think when we expect them not to be understanding, that's when we start feeling the caregiver burden. We feel like we can't go away from them. They'll be in a bad mood if we go. But if we just treat them with equality, where we can explain to them, look, I want to have a day out. I need to just go out for a while. They're pretty understanding. So I think the communication, keeping that open towards your parent that you're living with, plays a big role in getting your space and your time to do what you need to.
Okay, cool. There's something there's something about siblings that Joy has just said, and I'm going to save that question for a bit later. It touches on resentment and guilt. Shruti, I wanted to ask you this question, and it's talking about creation, and it's about operation creation for elder person care from a perspective of the physical, social, and the mental. What does that involve? How does it evolve? How does it happen?
So in terms of how we've done it,
or creation for elder person. Yes, how you guys have done it. Let's take it from your example. Yes.
So again, our setup is two-pronged in that we have residential care. So for the people who make Arama their home either for a long weekend or for the rest of their lives. And the aim is essentially that there's someone there to take care of their basic needs, help them, with bathing, going to the bathroom, but also constantly keeping them engaged, making sure nutritious meals are provided. And then we also provide, or we used to provide, which at the moment is on a halt due to COVID, is recreational services. So we'd have people who'd pop in to do yoga or to play bingo or to sing with us. And that's, to take part in an activity, but also to hang out like how we do with our friends. And I think Tasneem and Joy have both touched on this, that it's often just being part of something that a lot of people miss. A lot of people are lonely, and being part of a bigger plan makes them feel, gives them purpose, and yeah, helps with the aging process as well.
Okay, Martin, I think there's a question from the audience.
Yes, we've got a question from Niha Data. I hope I've pronounced it well. Suggestions of activities. What kind of activities can we do with grandparents struggling with dementia? Who will take that?
I can go for that one. The kind of activities you want to do with dementia is, one, you need to understand the person's or the patient's routine and keep to the routine, because routine is very important for them. It's good to involve them in exercise physical activity as much as they're able to and willing to do. It's also important to get them involved in memory games. Like you can just do simple math, simple, those card games that children have for memory, where you identify two similar cards and pick them out. Play games like those with them. Activities like coloring, activities like music, pet therapy, something called pet therapy, where they're looking after a pet. Listening to calming music. All those are activities that would help persons with dementia. Again, you have to also remember, with dementia, they can have good days, bad days. They can have moments where they get very aggressive because they're restless and they don't understand why they're restless. So when they're in those moments, try and maintain routine. Do not change, their room colors and curtain colors and bed arrangements, because any change in their routine makes a very big difference in how they will behave. I think those are the areas you look at. Activities they actually used to enjoy or may seem to enjoy, because they may develop new activities you see they have a certain interest in. So give them that. They could be wanting to play with dolls. They could want to just play with plants and leaves. They would want to color. Things like that. It all depends on the level of dementia a person's suffering from. The ones I'm talking about are between early and mild dementia.
Yeah, some of the activities that we found that work really well are like bingo. Something we do often is called reminiscing. So we'll pick up a topic, let's talk about Independence Day, or what do you think is the price of a loaf of bread? And it really gets people chatting, doing lots of puzzles, singing, dancing, sensory activities. So, getting their senses, awakened, different types of board games. But what we found is, you have to tailor the games or activities so that they're not feeling too childish, but yet they're not too complicated as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shruti. Joy, I want to ask this question, and actually, I'll open up to everybody as well. But I'm going to start with Joy, and this is obviously a personal take, so there's no right or wrong. It's just a conversation. How much influence to live with a grandparent, or in the case of your mom, is based on actual willingness, and how much is actually based on traditional culture?
Nice one.
Yeah, so I think that's quite personal. For me, when our father passed away, I could not imagine my mother staying alone. Like that really was all it was, and I felt that I was just going to stay with her. That was it. But I think it depends on the circumstances. I think if parents look like they're doing well and they're managing on their own, and they have help, which is is enough to keep them living well enough. I think that as children you don't see the need, and I think it's usually a matter of need which causes us to decide to live with our parents.
And Joy, can I ask, was your mom involved in making the decision?
I beg your pardon?
Was your mom involved in making the decision?
So
as well?
So maybe it wasn't. She wasn't involved very much. But what happened was, when our father passed away, So when he was very ill, we spent a couple of nights here with her, and when it would have been time to go away after we lost him, I didn't. I just stayed, and then later on, I asked her. I had the conversation with her and my siblings, and I said, "What, how about I just stay? How about I just don't go?" And she seemed all right with it, and that's how it happened. Okay. Okay.
I'd also like to say something there about, when I got disconnected earlier, about sometimes the influence is also about the grandparents or the parents' own choice. If they're independent, if they have health, if they have a social environment they're living in that's comfortable for them, they may not want to sacrifice that at that point because they're very comfortable in where they are. I don't know, maybe Shruti, you can add on to that because you have people living with you in the home, and for them, is it a choice that they make sometimes because that's where they're more comfortable? Because it always comes around sometimes where they feel like a burden to, they don't want to be a burden, and that's more of a psychological stressor for them if they have to live with their children and things like that, and they choose to want to be on their own as long as they have the support when it's required, so to speak.
Yeah, and so we've got a combination. We've got people who've said, no, this is where I want to go. I like the sound of it. We've had people who've come in and they've come in first for a trial for a few days, and they've understood how we operate, and then they go back home and say, okay, no, I'd like to move in permanently. So, and we encourage that as much as possible. It's important that everyone makes their own decisions. And which is why I think, Tasneem, you touched on this when you said having, what did you call it? Like a living will, like
the advanced planning, yes.
Advanced planning, exactly. That, if I'm not in a position to make these decisions, this is what I'd like to do in future. And unfortunately, that's not been up to now, not very common. But more and more, when I talk to people, I encourage them that these are things that we should be thinking about, as you said, as young as 40, so that it's a decision you've made and it's not something that someone else is making on your behalf.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I've just sat back and enjoyed this whole conversation. By the way, just carry on. I'm just going to sit here and just chill. It's a lot of fun. Very interesting.
Okay,
very eye-opening as well. Yeah, hey, the floor is yours. Feel free. I wanted to ask Dakari this question. No, I wanted to ask Dakari this question because it was based on something that Joy had said about siblings, and I want to talk about the aspect of guilt and resentment. All right, so you have a situation where you're saying, my brothers and sisters are also family. Why can't they then have the grandparents move in with them? And the swinging of the balance where it goes, I feel like a huge jerk for not being more willing to help our grandma or grandpapa. How does that dynamic work exactly? As in that thing of saying, my brothers and sisters, actually, why aren't they doing it? And then you're still hit with the same guilt of saying, but if I don't do it, then I'm going to look bad.
I think that's where, that whole balance comes in, because it's an individual, like even Joy had said, that it's a very personal choice. I mean, what's good for me may not be good for you. Maybe my dynamics as one sibling is not the same as yours as far as finances, time, social commitments are concerned. So everyone has that role to play. And I think it's important for all siblings and children to come together and also understand shared responsibility, because, yes, like Joy says, sometimes she does get tired and she does have a supportive network. Had it not been that case, maybe it would be very difficult for her. So it's something that you as a family need to have a very open conversation about, because at the end of the day, it's about the well-being of the older person, and also involve them. Maybe they don't want to be with a certain person at a certain time because they, parents can be very funny. They don't like especially for, Shruti and I probably will connect to this a little more, because from the Indian culture, when it comes to a girl, the girl's parents usually feel like we cannot go to the girl's house. We can't depend on our girl, the girl child. It's always a son's responsibility, which is not really now applicable to today's day and age, where both girl and boy child are working. I mean, as adults are now working and are taking care of family responsibilities. So it sometimes takes that very open conversation with the siblings and the parents to understand shared responsibility. And when it's something that comes willingly, I don't think it is a burden. And when you learn to enjoy the grandparents and the older person, when you learn to be objective towards how aging can be a very positive thing, and if health, again, I keep saying this and I keep saying it again and again, if health is maintained, aging is actually a very beautiful experience. It's a very fun space to be in. You know how we say when we have our 2-year-olds, they're really fun to be around. Grandparents and parents are also equally as much fun if you just give them the time and the opportunity to be that. Without just constantly putting them down, constantly feeling like they're not good, they're being difficult or they're being angry, because usually their characters changes is when something is wrong. Otherwise, older persons are not very difficult people to be around. It is actually a stigma that is associated to older persons, where they're looked at as a burden more than something that is, people that are productive. So if we change that mind shift, how we approach it becomes a really different approach from all areas of care, interaction, younger and older people mixing up. And I think that's what I would like this conversation to really drive home. Maybe Joy and Shruti would, because they interact and they live with them. For me, it's personal experience that I actually enjoy being with my parents. The kids love being there because they're actually fun, because they're given the environment to be allowed to be fun in. So that environment, if it's created, nobody feels like it's a burden at all at any given point.
Okay, Joy, Shruti, do you want to add anything to that? There's something I want to pick up on, something that Dr. Dr. Yamani said, but I want to give you a chance to just add to anything that she might have said.
I mean, I think obviously, it's a difficult decision, I think, even with siblings, like, so who does mom live with, or who moves in with mom, and who makes that decision? Especially, I think, or even in Joy's case, she's got siblings who are supportive and helpful, but what happens when you don't have that situation, where it's assumed that so-and-so has taken on the responsibility, so, they can deal with it? Or what happens when you've got siblings spread across the globe? And, or what happens when parents outlive their children, some of their children, and now you've got some children left and some grandchildren left. And we're seeing that more and more. We've got some people living a lot longer, and they've outlived pretty much half their children. And I think that's why people also had more children back in the day. It was almost like an insurance. But then how do you make decisions? Is the sibling in Kenya responsible because by default they're here? So I mean, I think it's sensitive, and there's, again, no right answer. But communication is key. Open communication is quite important, and also thinking about the financials. Who picks up the bills, because it is expensive, and it can be very expensive. So who picks it up? But you only know if you communicate.
Okay, thanks, Shruti. There's something I want to ask. I think it is in vein with something Martin might have just put up, but if not, then I'll pick it up. I wanted to find out, and this again is what I picked up from Dr. Yamani, the aspect of it's fun for you, Dr. Yamani, it's fun for you to live with your parents, etc. But I want to ask, I'll throw this question to Joy first. Are there things like grandparents? Okay, I'm talking about the grandparents of the children, obviously. Are there things that grandparents should avoid doing in order to make or ensure that the house has a more harmonious environment? Joy? Sorry, I was asking, Joy, I was asking, are there things that is there any suggestions or anything that grandparents should avoid doing in order to ensure that there's a harmonious living environment?
At that age, it's quite difficult to tell your parents what, to tell, at that age, they're kind of uninhibited, and they're quite forthright. So I guess you can sit down and have some rules, but you might find that it doesn't work. I don't know. I mean, with my mom, she has a little bit of, she forgets a lot. She's 85. She's a bit of dementia. So there's some things I try and tell her so that there's harmony in the spaces, because we have some spaces where I feel that the kids should be able to throw cushions, make a house full of with the cushions from the seats and things like that. So that's supposed to happen in our space, and I try and get them not to do that in her space. But sometimes she'll come into our space and tell them to stop doing that, and so I have to try and remind her again and again. So it depends on the age of your parent. You have to manage them according to how they are.
Yeah, I think,
Okay, thanks so much, Joy.
Knowing boundaries. I think as long as everyone respects boundaries. But like my dad will often tell me off for being too strict with my daughter, whereas he's the same person who is really strict on us. So, but just making sure that he's not telling me in front of her, because otherwise she'll find a way to manipulate the situation.
Actually, I wanted to ask this question, and I think it's happened to a lot of us, but the question about how do you deal with the conflict with your parent in front of your own children, because it's bound to happen every now and then. So I'm going to start with Joy, please. Go ahead. Sorry, there's a major delay. Sorry, Dr. Yamani, I'll ask that question to you. How do you deal with conflict with your parent and from your own children? Because it's bound to happen every now and then.
Okay, I think with that comes again that area that we've been talking about, boundaries and respect. We as adults, now the child, not the grandparent, the child is the person in between, because when you're a grandparent, as Shruti said, they're disinhibited. Joy had said, sorry, they are disinhibited. They can say whatever they want to, whenever they feel like. And sometimes it can be offensive being told off in front of your kids, or the other way around, when you're telling your kids something and your dad or mom feel it's not the right way and they interject. So I think it's about just having that conversation, maintaining the boundaries and explaining yourself, because if you just say, oh, they're old and I'm not going to do anything about it, it's eventually going to become an erupted volcano kind of setup where everyone's just going to be at each other's neck. So if you're just talking to each other constantly, making ground rules clear that you may have parented this way. For me, this is what works. And also it helps when your kids and your grandparents have a healthy relationship, because I think they then understand each other better. So even when there's conflict between either party or between you, your parents, you and your kids, there's a way that it's understood that this is not my space, so I'm not going to get involved. Keeping yourself in the neutral zone really helps a lot. When it's your business, you get involved. When it's not, let them sort it out. So that kind of everyone's creating their own bonds and creating their own communication areas. So no one feels torn apart. There's no question of somebody feeling like, oh, they're ganging up against me kind of situation, etc.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Shruti, because of Arama, this question, obviously, I need to ask you this question. It's a sad fact that grandparents may suffer elder abuse and neglect within the caregiver facility. So what kind of reassurances can be given to those considering out-of-home long-term residential care?
Okay. Yeah, and I think there's also been a lot of bad press surrounding this. Moving a parent into an elderly care or an assisted living facility is a trust-based, it's a relationship you're going into, and a long-term relationship. So I think, checking it out a few times, few different types of the day, randomly popping in, and your instinct will tell you certain things, keeping in touch with the parent or, the person, your loved one. Even if you can't visit, you can make video calls, you can check on things. Before they move in, you can talk to existing residents and ask as many questions. I think you get a feel. And it's something that obviously, we're constantly checking on as well on our end. But there is an element of trust that is involved.
Okay, thank you so much, Shruti. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, so I want to say that for those of us who have our parents in another space being looked after by staff, we need to remember that you can have neglect or abuse in that space too. If unless you're very, very, very keen, you can have it as well. So that can happen also in the home.
Something that,
just to add on to that,
needs to be taken into consideration. Yes.
Just to add on to that, when it comes to neglect in the house, and what helps is having routine checkups for your parents, because you see sometimes when they are being abused or going through something, they're also often very scared, because they also know that they're dependent on that caregiver who may be abusing them for certain things. So if they say something, they're scared that they may have to take the consequences of calling out abuse. So you have to create that environment where you have somebody screening them. It could be a psychologist. It could be, if you see a change in their moods, change in their appetite, change in their behavior in any way, you start seeing marks coming around. Those are kind of things you need to be a little bit cautious about when you are living with your older grandparent or parent who is being taken care primarily by a caregiver, not yourself, in your absence and things like that. So, keeping the red flags at the back of your mind when you care for an older person, whether as the primary or the secondary caregiver.
Okay. Something that I just picked up, I was just thinking, I think it's somewhere in the back of my head, but I was thinking about this question. Joy, you said your mom is 85?
Yeah.
And Dr. Yamani, you live with your parents.
Yeah, kind of.
And Shruti, you guys okay, kind of, okay, in proximity. I'm going to come to the question about proximity. But Arama,
yeah,
in terms of the assisted caregiving. So I want to ask this question: being around elderly people, and this might come across wrong, but does it then make you, at whatever point in life you are right now, take stock and say, okay, fine, if somebody is not as quick to recognize me as they used to be, what have you, or maybe they're not as mobile as they used to be, do you then start looking and taking stock of your life? Is it, from my perspective, does somebody who's moving in with you're living with, who's then to take stock of your life and start saying, maybe I should not have that last piece of cake, or maybe I should go and get checked up in terms of my faculties and everything like that? Yeah. So how does that impact me as a person who's then saying, I'm a relatively okay young person or middle-aged or whatever the case may be? Yeah. So how does that impact me in terms of, how does it impact people in terms of now looking at their health, both mentally and physical? And that's open. So I'll start with Joy, then go to Dr. Yamani, then finish with Shruti.
Yeah, so yeah, it really does make you think about that part of your life, that time of your life. It makes you think about it a lot. There was a point in the first few months of living with my mom that when I met any of my friends, I'd be saying, "You guys, we've got to build homes for ourselves when we're old. We've got to fix this. We've got to fix this." And it became a conversation I kept bringing up whenever I saw my friends. So yeah, it makes you think about it. It makes you be a bit more serious in terms of trying to live healthily. It makes you think that you want to do things slightly differently. If you see some things which are a bit hard, you see how you would want to change it. Yeah, it really does make you think. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joy. Dr. Yamani.
Just to add on to Joy, what you're saying, I mean, that's a really great thing, because that's what we want to do. We want to start thinking about aging as we are young, because we age every day, you know. I mean, and living with my parents, that's the same thing. Like, you know, when you see somebody, and with me, because I deal with older persons every day, I see all sorts of situations where it comes to either abuse, where it comes to, you know, the financial constraints that the older person has, the neglect, the isolation. And yes, it does bring around that worry of one day I will be there, and what am I doing to prepare for it? So that's where the whole, am I taking good care of myself? Am I making the right choices today? Because whatever choices I'm making today are going to impact me as I grow older and change the direction of my life, change the outcome of my life. I may live to 100. I mean, the life expectancy is 80 now, and you can have even longer. I see a lot of patients in their hundreds, and I feel personally, when I see older people in good health, it gives you hope. So I look at it from that side. And when I see patients who are not so healthy, it gives me the encouragement to also try and change my life, encourage people in my age group to change their lives, so that as we're growing older, we are becoming a more contributing society rather than one that is, feeling like we're going to become burdens to our kids or burdens to the society, not being able to be productive. So it really, really does open up your mind. It really makes you want to do better for yourself today so that you are able to give back tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Shruti, I needed you to just weigh in on that one.
Yeah, no, I think just to add, you appreciate that, what we're doing now is going to impact. But I think you also appreciate that, I mean, life isn't forever. You need to make the most of being in good health. And, we take a lot for granted, and it helps put things into perspective. But it's also a very humbling experience. We talk about hardships, and you hear the stories some of them have to say. And it really brings to light, like, what do we complain about? There was one lady, I was chatting to her, and we were chatting about the pandemic, and she's like, well, I've seen the plague, so it's fine, it's not a big deal. And she was explaining like what life was like during the plague, and how there was no WhatsApp. You heard certain cries, and you just heard that someone had passed away a few days later. So I think it really makes you quite grateful for where we are, and also obviously appreciating how important it is to plan for the future and for retirement and thereafter.
Yes, that retirement and planning for the future. Martin, there's something you wanted to ask. And Martin is on mute, or he's frozen. Okay, I'll come back to him. Okay. Two questions.
Question from one of our viewers. I'll post one after the other. Just read through it quickly, and then we go for it and see how we're going to tackle it. So that's from Eva Minor. How does one manage from a legal perspective in the event that, God forbid, the grandparent passes on or there are issues of inheritance? And the second question, are there legal documents or legal process that the family can fall back on to manage that process?
Any takers?
I know it's complicated if you don't have everything in place, but the technicality.
I think that is a question a legal person would probably be best, suited to answer. But from this side, I think if there's planning done, then usually I think the legal aspect takes care of it, and it just becomes what is on the will that goes for. And if there's no will, then I guess it just comes down to what the courts and the legal lawyers will, go around it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. Just coming up at the top of the hour, I want to ask this question because it's been mentioned 3 times, and I've been trying to squeeze it in, and this I think will go to everybody the same way. And let's look at this. I want you to be selfish about this. Okay. Let's look at it this way. From a practical perspective, and for what some might term as peace of mind, would it not be more prudent to move the grandparents, or you moving yourself, within proximity of each other, as in they don't have to be directly under your roof, but maybe you can see them over a garden somewhere, but they don't have to be under your roof. So I'm going to open that question up to everybody who wants to jump in. Proximity versus in your face.
Okay,
don't all go at the
nobody's
same time.
going. I'll go first. I think the proximity is great because that way they get their space, you get your space. Unless, of course, you know, there are those parents that maybe what we term as overbearing, who always want to be with you or be around you. And in cases like that, then it might be difficult. But you have to remember, as you make those choices or which choice works for you, making sure you're taking care of their mental and psychological health as you make those decisions is really important. And I think with communication, that problem becomes solved, on its own, because you're talking to each other, you're explaining where you're coming from, and more often than not, I think with the proximity, there's that love, there's that peace, there's that less of the fights and more of the love situation, in my opinion.
Thanks, Dr. Yamani. Who's next? Who's feeling shy?
I'm gonna add, and I'm gonna say that I think proximity is also really good, and I think where you have parents who are still able and they have help and they're still, I think the best thing for an elderly person is to do as much as possible for themselves for as long as they can, and sometimes actually moving them to your home does them no good because they stop. They stop sorting out their laundry, they stop sorting out their shopping, So having them really close to you and letting them continue doing those things for themselves is really great if they're well enough for that. So I think proximity is good for the sort of elderly person who is well enough for that.
Yeah, I think, completely agree with that. Like, obviously, the circumstances, and boundaries are really important. So it's not that children are taking advantage or taking their parents for granted or grandparents for granted and vice versa. Ensuring that you've set the boundaries at the onset.
You're on mute, Waweru. Gotcha.
No, you're the one who muted me. I know you're testing me. You muted me. You muted me on purpose.
How did that happen?
Because see, you're the one with the magic powers for this technology stuff. So I want to ask our guests, first of all, again, as always, thank you. I apologize for my side in terms of technical hitches, but I think our viewers got a lot more out of it. They didn't have to see me anyway about it. So I want to ask each of you to give us your parting shots on this subject matter. Anything else you'd like to let viewers know about that you strongly advocate for, especially when it comes to this aspect of the elderly and living with them or moving them in with you, or putting them in a home, whatever the case may be. And I'll start with Dr. Yamani.
For me, this is like a mantra I work with, is life begins at 60 now. It's no longer life begins at 40, because we have so much health at 60 that there's so much time to do everything that we never had a chance to because of responsibilities. So let's try creating that environment where we, as we head into the older age, can age well, and also create an environment where the older persons we're living with or are in close proximity to or caring for can enjoy the longer years of their life lived. It's all about good health. It's all about aging well. It's all about giving the right environment because, like I said, aging is a beautiful process. It's a daily process. Let's make it count.
Joy, what would you like to give us as your parting shot?
So I'd like to say that there's no one solution for everybody. There's so many variables that you have to look at and make a decision about what works for everybody based on all those variables. And I think that it's not terrible if you try something, it doesn't work, and then you have to change it and do something else. I think that's how life is. I think the other most important thing is that it's the engagement, and you want to manage loneliness and boredom of an older person. Those are the two, I think, even more important, almost more important than the physical of an aging person, so that they're engaged and they're busy, and they feel needed and they feel useful, and they feel that there's something to wake up for every day. And so I think, and I think that the way God has planned humans, that was very wise, because he's done it so that towards the end of our journey, that there is a great excuse for the people who love us to be more around us. And so I think that's something we should take advantage of. Yeah.
Last but not least, Shruti, give us your parting shot.
Yeah. I think, like Joy said, there's no one size fits all. So whatever decision or circumstance you're in, just to make aging a fun, comfortable, and safe space. And I think plan ahead and ensuring that each one of us has some sort of a purpose to wake up for every morning.
Thank you so much, Shruti, and thanks to our guests. Sorry, I needed to ask, because when I dropped off, I wanted to find out, and I know I keep saying we're running out of time, and usually Martin is the one who's telling me this, but I wanted to ask this question, and if it has been answered in my absence, well, it's fine. But the question about us as and I talked about myself as middle-aged. I'm a spring chicken as far as I'm concerned, but do we as a generation, we actually stop and take stock and say, okay, fine, how am I approaching the issue of advanced planning, in terms of, I know my parents in another 2 years are going to be hitting, I think, 70. Is there anything I've put in place, or am I just being selfish and thinking, me, I need to make my money now, and if I make my money now, then it's okay, I can throw money at the problem. You see what we're saying, Ati, they're going to be considered as a problem. I can throw money at the problem as long as I take care of my needs right now, and then I don't have to think about them until much later on. I don't know whether that was addressed in my absence.
I don't think it was.
No.
Okay, so that's a question I'd like to just try and finish on, in terms of the younger generation, your millennials and everything. Are they actually taking on an attitude of approaching the issue of advanced planning from their parents' perspective?
It's a good one. I don't think so, but let's hear. Let the guests tell us.
Just say that again.
That question is worth 10 marks. I'm asking, as millennials or the generation Zers or whatever they're called now, are they approaching the issue of advanced planning as their parents age, or are they just too busy TikToking and tweeting and what have you, not actually stopping to take stock of the fact that my parents are going to be getting older, and as they're getting older, they're going to have more needs. But do they have a planning process in their heads as Generation X or millennials right now? Or do you see, I'm saying, have you seen anybody who's like, for example, somebody who's like maybe 30 years old saying, my parents are going to be 70 in the next couple of years, and in place I have these kind of plans that I want to have for them, either if they're going to move in with me, or I'm going to move them to a home, etc., etc., etc.
So I'll say something. I imagine that a good percentage of them are not. I myself, when I was in my 40s, my parents' aging came as a shock. Not as a shock. It's a surprise, the way you see them change, slowly changing, becoming more dependent, requiring more. It's a surprise, and I think that's another reason why this conversation we're having is so important. It would be great if we, in our 30s, were thinking about, in another 30 years, I'm going to be looking after my mother and father. So this house, I've got to build it with a guest wing, or, I've got to build two. I'm not going to build one house. I'm going to build another house next to it, a little cottage next to it. That would be great. But I suspect that they're not thinking about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is very reactive, right? So a situation gets thrown in your life and you react. And I think, but on the flip side, I think people who are hitting 70 now are more aware that they need to start planning, because if they've taken care of their parents, they're more aware, and hopefully as time goes, younger generations will also be more actively prepared.
Okay, I think it was important to get that in, especially to the younger viewers who are watching and thinking that, yeah, that it's not going to happen to their parents, or it's not going to happen to them. From my perspective, it's something that needs to be kept in the back of their minds and needs to be cognizant of always, I guess. We lost Dr. Yamani. Unfortunately, I was going to see what she was going to give input to that one. But yeah, Martin, I guess I'll hand over back to you.
Well, there she is. Let me add her onto the video.
Yeah, okay, let's see whether she can. Sorry, Dr. Yamani, we were just conversating about, or rather, you heard the question of asking about Generation X and millennials and whether they are actually preparing themselves properly.
Mm-hmm. Now, right now I'm in the middle of a course on the aging decade, and because of that, that's where I think a lot of the younger people are now being targeted, so to speak, to create the awareness on why it's important to look into the aging population. So I think we're still not at that point where they are really thinking about the older population or their parents aging or getting to that time zone where they may be a bit more dependent and all. But I also feel that there is a lot of work going on currently around creating awareness, educating people, and there's a lot more conversation happening around aging and older persons, because we are statistically heading into an area where the older population is going to be double of what the newborn population is going to be in the next maybe 10 or so years. So given those dynamics, there's a lot of focus on it, and because the focus is being placed, there's a lot of education going on. So I think by the time we're looking at the next 10, 15 years, we should have a more educated, a better prepared generation to deal with the older population. And I'm hoping that even in ours, generally in Kenya, there is a very healthy culture of taking care of our older parent. It's just a cultural thing that we come from. That is a great advantage to growing old in an environment like this, because you do already have that. It kind of comes with just being born into the culture, but now doing the right thing at the right time enhances that. It actually enhances how well prepared we're going to be for the next 20 years coming up.
Okay, cool. On that note, I'd just like to say again, thank you very much to our guests for shedding a lot of light on a topic that I don't think many people actually stop to think about. Definitely does not come up in everyday conversation. But Martin, I'll hand it back over to you now, again, for the last time.
Well, mine is to say thank you all for coming on the show. It's been, you see where this time, I think this is the first show I have not commented on time. Of course, I had my eye on but it's so interesting. Every point that we're talking about is just interesting. And for someone who's lived with a grandparent, when I went to Europe as a 19-year-old, I actually lived with my grandma for 2 years. And it was very interesting. And I listened to a lot about the grandparents being fun. They may be older, but they don't lose their humor and things like that. I listened to Joy talking about set rules in the house, and they have their set ways, so you either adapt or find your own ways and things. So it's just a matter of how you maneuver your way around it. But I think in the case of my grandma, I constantly made her feel youthful in a sense, just surprising her with flowers. Not like she was going anywhere on a date or anything, but it was just constantly just maybe reminding her of her younger days with my grandpa or something like that. And I just loved seeing the smile on her face when I brought chocolates. One day I came with flowers or something, or small things that really matter. They don't cost much, but they go a long way in just making them happy and the environment. So thank you all for watching. Thank you for spending an hour and 15 minutes with us this evening. As usual, I have as usual I have something here to share. I forgot to load it in good time. Oops. Oh dear. You see, I was listening to I was so listening to this show that I forgot
And
to
you're so engrossed.
load my parting shot. The quotes. So you can see the screen there. Nobody can do for little children what grandparents do. Grandparents sort of sprinkle stardust over the lives of little children. That's Alex Haley. And grandparents are the footsteps to the future generations. Well, it's not grandparents' day, but yes, the message still holds. And with that, I hope there is somebody, some grandparent watching us tonight. And I guess we dedicate this show to you. And good night. Good night, all. And see you next week. Another interesting topic. I think we're now slowly pushing into the discussion, the topics that are on everyone's lips, on everyone's minds, but nobody wants to talk about them freely. So stay tuned next week for another interesting topic. Bye-bye.
Yeah.